Did you see that?
I saw it. You didn't change the lighting.
I didn't touch it. Looks alive.
Yes.
It's growing.
Hey guys, what's happening? Nihat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we'll be taking a look at the 1971 virus classic, The Andromeda Strain, directed by Robert Wise, based on Michael Crichton's seminal novel of the same name, released in 1969, which popularized the hybrid genre known as techno-thriller, and established the author as a gifted genre writer. I was recently contacted by the lovely folks at Penguin Publishing in New York who notified me that they were about to release a new edition of Crichton's classic to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the novel, and I thought it would be a great addition to the Virus series you guys have been going crazy for on this channel. After rereading an advance copy of the book that they were kind enough to send me, researching Crichton's history, and watching the film adaptation, I've come to see how influential the book has been to filmmakers and storytellers who've endeavoured to delve into pathogen and virus-related narratives in the years that followed. Drawing inspiration from science fiction thrillers, as well as the spy and war genres, the novel took advantage of the Cold War paranoia that had gripped the world due to the rise in the nuclear armament of powerhouses like the US and the Soviet Union during that period. While most stories written during this time were focused on the risks and the catastrophic effect of nuclear fallout, the Andromeda Strain instead focused on the then new field of biological warfare. This choice of subject matter by Michael was inspired by his experiences exploring medicine, with him writing his first few drafts while studying, and ultimately publishing the novel the same year he'd received his MD from Harvard Medical School. It's for this reason that the book and film both feel so realistic, exploring the political and moral issues posed by modern science, technology, and scientific breakthroughs, as well as the themes of governmental malice, the hubris of the human intellect, and humankind's precarious existence in the face of bacteria. The techno-thriller follows a group of elite scientists as they attempt to contain a deadly virus from outer space, designated the Andromeda Strain. The novel begins by pointing out that technology was snowballing to the point where there was bound to be a crisis caused by human oversight, much like Chernobyl and the 3 Mile incident in Pennsylvania. Crichton also highlights how the growing biological field of science, which at that time had been relatively unexplored, had never had a significant crisis, alluding to the idea that it was only a matter of time before a disaster beyond our control would cause considerable damage toward humankind. We're also informed of a Project Scoop, which was a scientific mission to locate life in the extreme outer limits of the atmosphere. Purportedly, this mission was to gain knowledge that would protect people from any future alien contagion, but in reality, the US government had hoped to harness this knowledge for biological warfare. Now, multiple satellites are launched into space that either had catastrophic failures or returned to Earth with nothing. The 7th satellite launches successfully, but shortly after, the dish is struck by a mysterious particle, causing it to plummet back to Earth and crash land in Piedmont, a small town in Arizona with a population of 50. 2 government agents are then sent to recover it, and to their shock and horror, they discover most of the town's inhabitants lying dead on the ground. Most of the people of Piedmont are cut down mid-stride, while others had lost their minds and taken their own lives. Within minutes, the 2 agents also die, indicating that a virus of unknown origins had been responsible. Suspecting that the equipment had returned from space with an extraterrestrial contaminant, the duty officer tasked with retrieving the satellite initiates Wildfire, an initiative involving a government-sponsored team of 5 bright scientists in diverse fields intended to contain threats of this nature. Much to the surprise of the scientists that investigate Piedmont in hazmat suits, they find an infant and an older man that were still alive, and decide to bring them to their secret base for observation, along with the satellite dish presumed to have infected the town. When they request a nuclear attack on Piedmont to contain the spread of the pathogen, the order is postponed by the president, who is concerned about the geopolitical ramifications of breaking the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, which had been agreed to in 1970. Though this does seem like a foolish choice at the start, we come to realize that this was actually a brilliant decision, but not for the reasons we might think. The movie plays out pretty much like the novel and is split up into 4 parts, each representing a new day. The first involves the assembling of the team and their observation of Piedmont. The second is their introduction to the facility in which they'll be working. The third is their pivotal research, and the fourth is the riveting conclusion to the 10th saga.
That tells us what we want to know, Hall. The organism is inhaled. The clotting begins in the lungs and spreads outward.
I didn't think it possible. I didn't think the total volume of blood could solidify that fast.
While not exactly a virus, the microorganism that contaminated Piedmont functioned similarly to pathogens found on Earth that changed organic matter at a biological level, before its frequent mutations prompted Andromeda to behave in unusual ways. This unprecedented change in behavior is seen when it's first observed in the blood of humans, where it caused mass clotting that transformed the blood into a powder-like substance, before the Andromeda strain began to grow, reproduce, and change into a new form that consumed a synthetic plastic compound called polychron, which had the same chemical properties as artificial skin. Once they began analyzing it, the Wildfire team discovered that it had a crystal-like structure that used no proteins or amino acids, just basic elements including hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. They then figure out that it killed humans by attacking the walls of their small capillaries, which caused widespread clotting. Since the brain housed the most number of capillaries, a handful of people within Piedmont that weren't affected as fast as the others went insane as the blood began pooling in their head. Further baffling the scientists studying it was the eventual revelation that the Andromeda strain consumed everything and wasted nothing, functioning like an atomic reactor, converting matter to energy and energy to matter. However, it initially could only exist within a narrow pH range. It's for this reason that the only two survivors from the small town were an elderly man and an infant that both had abnormal pH blood levels. The old man had essentially consumed an unhealthy number of painkillers and had drunk high concentrations of ethanol, causing his body to have a high acidic blood range, while the infant was saved by his constant screams and wailing, which led to him developing too much alkaline in his blood for Andromeda to handle. The pathogen eventually mutates to a non-contagious form, but because the decontamination chambers and the seals within the laboratory were made of synthetic plastic, Andromeda began to tear through them, which automatically triggered the Wildfire Emergency Protocol, setting the facility on a 5-minute countdown before a nuclear bomb detonated within the laboratory to contain the risk of an outbreak. But because the Andromeda strain could feed on raw energy to create matter, the explosion would actually see it aggressively mutate once again and spread across the country. This sends the scientists in a race against time to disable the bomb manually and avert a national and potentially global disaster of humanity's own doing, which they ultimately managed to do in the nick of time. We're also told that the super colony of Andromeda that had once been over Piedmont was contaminated with silver iodide to encourage it to rain over the ocean, where the seawater was predicted to neutralize it, in a process known as ocean acidification. Both the novel and film have paved the way for other virus-related stories that followed in the years to come. We see this with films like the Resident Evil series, which copied many shots directly from the Andromeda strain, like the fence facility in the desert and the underground laboratory where sensitive research was being carried out. Even the term wildfire was borrowed by The Walking Dead, which named its zombie virus after the protocol. I've actually covered the T-virus in Resident Evil and the wildfire virus seen in The Walking Dead in videos I'll be leaving a link to below, and if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend that you check them out.
Put your hands on that glass, palms down. It's a finger and palm print analyzer that...
It's a composite of 10,000 dermatographic lines.
How'd you know that?
Oh, that one. I have a long criminal record.
The secret underground facility where the team go to study Andromeda is a subsurface cylindrical building whose every level is more biologically sterile than the one above it. As the scientists and the patients descend to the lowest level, they are cleansed of all contaminants and no longer allowed to eat food, but rely on prefabricated supplements. The lower they go and the closer they get to the nuclear device, the more everyone seems to be robbed of their humanity. Echoing and feeding the characters' feelings of doom and despair, the structure of Wildfire is laced with visual references to Dante's Inferno. As each of the characters enter Wildfire, the door also closes behind them with the statement, "No return through this access," which invokes Dante's inscription on the gates of hell, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." I also thought it was interesting that the soundtrack to the film, the pacing, as well as the visual style, especially once the scientists arrive at the laboratory, is reminiscent of Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's no surprise then that the same designer and set constructor had worked in both films, achieving a dreary sense of isolation and relative helplessness the further down we journeyed into the facility, similar to those experienced in the space opera. It's for this reason that it feels as though both films could exist in the same universe at different points in Earth's history. Most of the features strictly adheres to the structure of Crichton's novel very closely, with only a few minor changes, like how the bits of information are relayed to the characters. An excellent example of this is how in the novel, Dr. Hall, who was one of the 5 scientists a part of the Wildfire Protocol, is intentionally not told of his grand role of being in charge of controlling the nuclear bomb within the laboratory, while in the film, he merely doesn't read his notes as he doesn't realize the seriousness of their predicament, much to the dismay of the rest of the team. I think that the most significant differences between the two is the change of Dr. Leavitt's character from a male to female in the film. Not only was this a progressive change for its time, with the introduction of an intelligent woman that was equal in stature to her colleagues, but the talented Kate Reid who plays Leavitt in the film injects the character with a fiery, stubborn spirit. And she is, in my opinion, the most dynamic and exciting character to watch in the entire film.
My orders come from Dr. Robertson, the President's science advisor in Washington.
There's a phone. Pick it up. Call Robbie. Tell him I burned my draft card.
While the movie ends with an open-ended question about how humanity will cope with future threats, in the novel it's revealed that sometime after the Andromeda incident, a spacecraft had plummeted from the atmosphere under similar circumstances, alluding to the likelihood that it was either Andromeda or another unknown extraterrestrial pathogen that was responsible for this. If you haven't read the book or seen the film, I've left a link to where you can pick them up in the description below. And with the release of the 50th anniversary edition of Crichton's The Andromeda Strain earlier this week, now is as good a time as any to check them out. Well, that's all for today, folks. Special thanks to Michelle from Penguin Publishing for reaching out to me. And of course, many thanks to the numerous subscribers who have been requesting an exploration of the Andromeda Strain for some time. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content. And if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Nihat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.
Vandal Decker to Caper 1, what's happened?
We see bodies. Lots of them.
Are you certain, Caper 1?
Damn it, Conroe. Of course we're certain.
Get me Major Manchek.
Somehow they don't hardly look dead, Lieutenant. They're all over the place. Must be dozens of them.
Damn it, get this call through.
It's sort of like they just dropped in their tracks, sir. Sir!